Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for December through March. Over the last 30 days, we've seen generally warm temperatures across most of the Great Basin, along with well below normal precipitation, especially over the southern half of the region. Storms that have moved across the Great Basin have mainly brought precipitation to parts of Idaho and Wyoming, and occasionally to parts of far northern Nevada. Looking at the precipitation since the beginning of October, the beginning of the water year, and you can see well below normal precipitation across the Great Basin. Again, the only areas that are near normal have been up north over parts of southern and western Idaho, and then again further north into the Pacific Northwest in Montana, which is again where the storm track has been targeting, bringing storms across the northern tier of the U.S. Currently, our snowpack is generally near normal in parts of the higher terrain of Idaho and Wyoming, and actually slightly above normal over parts of the Sierra into northwest Nevada. However, this snowpack will continue to dwindle here over the next week or so with drier and warmer weather. Further south, Utah is seeing below normal snowpack really in most areas, and again, we're looking at a drier period here going into the next couple of weeks. Soil moisture, again with the drier conditions and the lower snow totals, has been certainly well below normal across parts of Utah, and then again into California and even parts of the Sierra Front. Looking at the evaporative demand drought index, we have had some improvements since this time last month, however still seeing significant drought over parts of southern areas of the Great Basin that have remained very dry over the last several months. Further north, we are seeing definitely some improvements into northern Nevada and into Idaho, where some of that precipitation moves across over the last month, and also where the cooler temperatures have remained. Looking at our drought monitor now, currently it is obviously most severe over parts of Utah and into southern Nevada and the Arizona Strip, where we are seeing that exceptional drought classification, even over parts of eastern Utah. Again, this is obviously the drier side of the Great Basin. Further north, as we move into Idaho, we're only seeing abnormally dry conditions with only a few spots that have remained outside of the precipitation over south central Idaho, seeing some drought conditions. However, we will see likely that drought improve further north across Idaho and Wyoming, and again, this is where precipitation is expected to remain to be the focus here over the next couple of months, and we're likely going to see no change in the drought further south. We even could see the drought intensify depending on the amount of precipitation going forward here in the next few months. Looking at some of our current ERC charts for the end of November, you can see up north in Idaho, ERCs have dropped significantly and are around normal for the time of year. Further south into Nevada, along parts of the Sierra Front, where we saw larger fires that were a very big impact a couple of weeks ago, ERCs have now dropped to around near normal. We are still seeing above normal ERCs over southern areas of the Great Basin that have remained dry and are still even near records for the time of year, but are certainly quite a bit lower than what we would even have seen for normal conditions back in the summer. So although they are above normal, things are certainly on the downward trend, and especially with the cooler temperatures and longer nighttime periods. Looking at some of our dead fuel moisture, our 10-hour fuel moisture has definitely increased across the Great Basin with some precipitation that we've seen, and also with the colder temperatures and shorter daytime periods. However, we are still seeing that 5 to 6% range for 10-hour fuel moisture in southern areas of the Great Basin. 100-hour fuel moisture also has improved. The drier areas are obviously in the southern areas, but again, fuel moisture has increased to about the 11 to 15% range. And 1,000-hour moisture, similar. We are still seeing those drier areas over southern areas of the Great Basin. Currently, we have no significant large incidents across the Great Basin as things have definitely slowly quieted down here over the last month. So now that we've seen where we've come from, we'll be moving forward to the outlook, looking at La Nina and El Nino, looking at some of our forecast models. Each of these lines represents a different forecast model, and you can see the trend of most of the models is very similar. Currently, we are in a state of La Nina, and that will likely continue here for the next couple of months. However, ocean temperatures will be on the warming trend as we get into the early part of next year, and we may even see a return to normal conditions as we approach next fire season. And right now, what La Nina typically means and what we are seeing is that precipitation generally targets the Pacific Northwest, the northern Rockies, and far northern areas of the Great Basin, and we tend to see drier and warmer conditions over the southern half of the Great Basin. And again, that is certainly how we have entered into this fall and early part of the winter. So looking at our outlook from December 9th through the 19th, looking at warmer conditions over much of the west, and again, drier conditions really over much of the west. We will see that pattern change later in the month. However, right now we're seeing a pretty strong ridge of high pressure dominating the west coast, so we are seeing warm and dry conditions here for the next week or so. Looking at the rest of November, we will start to see that ridge break down towards the middle of December and then later in the month. So again, that precipitation will mainly target the north, but we will see periods of precipitation also possible towards mid to late December over parts of western and northern Nevada as well. So really the only drier spots are still expected to be the far southern areas of the Great Basin, with periods of moisture and cooler temperatures from mid to late December impacting the northern half of the region. Looking at the January through March time period, we're expecting more of a classic La Nina signature pattern, seeing cooler and wetter conditions over the northern areas of the country. So again, this will impact Idaho and Wyoming specifically. And then eventually that precipitation at times will dip down into northern Nevada and northern Utah, but still expecting some fairly dry conditions to continue over southern areas of the Great Basin. Right now, as we approach later in December into January, we could see some of those storms again dip a little bit further south, impacting central areas and western areas of the Great Basin, and then a return of that pattern possibly by March. So if we had to pick some months that would see precipitation pushing further south, it would be late December into January, and then again returning in March. But we are looking at a fairly decent year for precipitation and snowpack in the northern areas of the Great Basin. So if we put all these pieces together, our outlook is generally normal conditions for December through March. Again, with the drier conditions in the far south, if we have windy days and if we see non-natural fire starts, that would be a concern for possibly a burning period of spread. And that would also be similar conditions over parts of western and central Nevada. If we did see a fire start on windy days after dry periods, we certainly will have some potential impacts, but again, that would be for a burning period or two, and then cooler temperatures would set in, and those conditions would quickly die down. So generally normal conditions, but again, still watching for those windy periods whenever we have them as a heightened sense of situational awareness this year, especially just with how dry things have been. That concludes our webcast for this month. Check back in January 1st for the next seasonal outlook.